Hey, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some thoughts and some work, overview of some work related to extreme events and durability and longevity of transportation systems. My presentation is not going to be technical in detail, but more of an overview or a framework of how to get more out of the existing system in terms of preserving what its capabilities are and extending its functional use over time. This is based on the premise that adding or building a new is extremely resource intensive. And so the argument is, how do we make most out of the existing resources? And my thoughts, and I guess our collective thoughts, are to people at present affected by Hurricane Nicole over the last couple of days, since yesterday. But extreme events can be from natural causes, such as the hurricane we just talked about, earthquakes, fires, floods, storms, whether they be summer or winter, rain or snow, tornadoes. And so the lead time that, okay, the next type is man-made. And these could be large events, concerts, conventions, sporting events, those related to incidents involving hazardous materials, either being transported or stationary at plants or factories, for example. Deliberate acts of terror. And while we may not look at it, man-made traffic crashes, I'm not talking about one or two vehicle involved incidents, but sometimes we see dozens, if not more, vehicles involved in crashes. The lead time that we have varies. For tornadoes, it may be a few minutes. For hurricanes, it may be days. Earthquakes, it's probably milliseconds, okay? So the time we have to prepare for these events ranges from instantaneous to weeks or months. In some cases, we can even get month advance notice in terms of months. Man-made events, however, the special events, we have weeks, if not months of advance notice, but acts of terror, traffic crashes, and hazardous materials related incidents may not have that amount of lead time. So all of these affect both the supply side and the demand side of the transportation systems. I'm talking about systems that include multiple modes and connections between the modes. So how do we preserve what we have, and how do we extend its service life or functional life? What are some of the key considerations? That's what I'll try to go over with you in the next several minutes. So the disruptions or perturbations could be temporal or spatial. Just as we talked about the advance warning or notice that we have, the ramifications, or how long do these last? How far do they extend? Some of these may be within a small geographic proximity. Others, such as floods, could be miles and miles and miles, or even beyond. Tornadoes wreak havoc, sometimes across states. Hurricanes, just as a graphic on the previous slide that I showed you, affect numerous states. So that's spatial. Temporal could be from a few minutes to months and months, and sometimes years, to restore operations. So, but how can we get more out of the existing system? Some of the key actions and considerations, I've got a whole bunch of words that begin with the letter R. When you have an event, the first thing is reconnaissance. Take stock of what has happened, what exists, what is not there. Relief to those who are affected. Recovery. Recovery is more short-term, and restoration is longer term. And these are dependent upon some of the redundancies we may have in the systems, the resiliency that we have built into the systems, and past resource allocation, as well as resources that we have available to allocate to address the previous R's that I mentioned. And there are a lot of interdependencies. This is just not the transport system or transport network, such as the roads, transit systems, rail, aviation, all of these are involved. But beyond that, increasingly, we are more dependent, more and more interdependent on the electric grid, communications networks, be they wireless or fiber optic networks, water, wastewater systems, and a number of other hard infrastructure systems. So there are 5 items that I'll address in the rest of my presentation. The first one relates to analysis of mobility needs, leveraging data and the growing opportunities to harvest data, to mine data, to gather data from varied sources that may be even non-traditional. Interagency considerations, this is far more from a policy perspective than from a technical perspective. Emergency response, this includes all of the R's that I talked about on the previous slide, and supply chain issues. The approaches we take may be based on location specific when you're developing an approach of so addressing a problem in a locale. Maybe it could be a city, a part of a city, a county, a state, or a region that includes multiple states. Or from a theoretical or conceptual perspective, how do we develop tools and models and techniques that are location agnostic in the sense that it's not based on one specific location. It is how do we come about, bring about change in existing ways of doing business? How do we develop models that can be adopted or adapted across geographies? So those are 2 separate approaches. I'm not going to be talking about these 2 in my presentation today. So the mobility analysis is across passengers and freight, across modes and the intermodal connectivity. Mobility analysis needs to take into account emergency response. You'll keep hearing emergency response throughout my presentation. And the needs of various types of people. I'm not talking freight here, but freight and emergency response, medical services are quite different too. People include those with physical or cognitive limitations who can't. You can't tell them, hey, get out of here, evacuate, or even shelter in place. They may not be able to do so without help. Elderly, healthcare facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, so on. Schools, where you have people in hundreds, concentration of people in hundreds, but who do not have the ability to leave if you need them to leave. Shelter in place is possible. Prisons, interesting, because you can't just open up the doors and say, hey guys, there's an emergency, get out of here, right? And there are a number of tools that federal agencies, this is a recent publication by FEMA and Oregon National Labs in trying to help develop plans and how to use some of their tools. So it includes planning, addressing operational needs, taking advantage of existing assets and how do we manage them, and tools that we may have for models and tools. Some may be legacy, which have been around for a while, and others are emergent or newly developed. Data come from various sources at various scales of resolution, both spatial and temporal. How do we capture them? How do we integrate them when some of the data may be coming at 10 hertz, some may be coming 1 every second, some may be coming 1 every hour. Spatial resolution may be by a city block, by a city scale, or by a state scale. How do you analyze them? And how do you communicate the results of these analyses? We definitely should be able to leverage technologies, not only in capture of data, but in integrating and analyzing data. But some of the key challenges include when we look at sensors and sensor networks, the connectivity between them, the communications between them and perhaps the command and control center, if you're using edge computing from the edge to the node, to the central node. The interoperability. You have so many different types of sensors, be they cameras, they could be the size of a button, and so on and so forth. How do we develop tools, standards first, and then tools that take advantage of these standards and interoperability guidelines? But one key emerging threat is cybersecurity. As we exchange data, there are certainly threats related to interjection of false data or interception of actual data and modification of that. And in some cases, it could be just an inadvertent error made by an unwitting person. And how do we build models and tools to tie all of these together? This is more from a public policy perspective in terms of interagency considerations. When you look at infrastructure systems, not just the transport network, but as I said, the electric grid, natural gas, water, wastewater, they are publicly owned and privately owned and operated. There are other enablers and providers, such as, let's say, our wireless communication systems. The electric grid is privately owned for the most part, or from cooperatives. Natural gas, likewise. So there are jurisdictional considerations. Who has authority? Who has the decision-making responsibility and authority, command and control? And how do we do all of this in advance so that when you have a situation such as a natural or man-made hazard, things are well in place. Fortunately, in the United States, over the last few decades, there have been lots and lots of efforts coordinated at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, to develop some of these, put in place policies, planning activities, tabletop exercises to bring these together. But communications are absolutely critical in terms of everybody understanding where they stand, what their roles are, what their contributions are, and the coordination and cooperation are extremely critical out here. Got a couple more slides. So I told you emergency response goes all across the presentation. So as mentioned earlier, reconnaissance is a big part of it. Taking stock of what has happened, what is left, what has vanished, what can we muster, what can we bring on. Bringing immediate relief to those who have been affected, individuals, animals, property, so on. So there is a triaging that needs to take place. And this is a recent document that FEMA put out in terms of trying to look at the whole community core capabilities, the national capabilities and elements therein. I'll talk about a few of these. From a transportation perspective, looking at where is the demand, where do we have capacity? Let me talk about the medical part of it first. If you have a major incident in Las Vegas, unfortunately, a few years ago, we had an event that is often referred to as 1 October, where we had a mass casualty. A sniper from the top of, from one of the upper floors of a hotel shot and killed 51 people at a concert. This was proximate to the interstate highway, proximate to Las Vegas Boulevard, otherwise known as the Strip or the corridor, convention centers, so on. But it was not close to any of our trauma centers. And there were thousands of people who were affected, many injured, others who were in the vicinity for a music concert. This occurred when the sniper took shot at attendees at a music concert. So looking at where are the trauma centers, the triaging is who needs to be taken where. What level of trauma can it be taken care of locally without going to a trauma center, to just emergency ward? Where are the ambulances, EMS vehicles? What are the capabilities of the transport network? In this case, because of the lot of magnitude of people concentrated in one area and them wanting to get out, you had pedestrian traffic, not necessarily vehicular traffic. And the pedestrian traffic flowing onto road networks, which would otherwise have been used to evacuate people to get medical services on. But the flip side of it is we have contraflow. While you're trying to get people out of an affected zone, you need to have emergency response, whether it is materials, whether it is medical personnel, whether it is ambulances, whether it is other types of communication devices, so on and so forth. You have to have people coming in. So how do you balance these? And once again, communications, communications, communications. And the last part is supply chain. We have the imbalance between the demand and supply, and as we are well aware of, particularly over the last 2.5 years, there are major challenges with the supply chain, even with a small perturbation. And the key is inventory. Where do you have the materials you need? How long will it take to get it to you? And do you have the capabilities in terms of labor, vehicles, fuel, and once again, communications? And this is a photo from about a year ago from the port of Long Beach in terms of the queues of, this is just a surface part, and there's another photo of all the ships that were waiting to dock and get stuff off. And so there are a lot of interdependencies between all of these. So to tie all of these together, I know I'm right at my 15-minute mark. We can't look at it at just one. We can't look at it as building our way out, especially when you have extreme events. We need to figure out how to get most out of the existing system. Durability in terms of short term, longer term. Extending the useful life or the functional life of what we have. Rejuvenating maybe some of the things that we have so that before we are able to muster the financial resources, the materials and supplies, we can provide some reasonable level of service to the user community. So with that, I'd like to stop my presentation and with the moderator's prerogative, take questions. Thank you once again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Shashi, for the great presentation. Now we'll open it up to the floor for questions. Any questions?
This sounds like a typical class that I lead when I ask students for any questions. It's dead silence.
Yeah, we have one question.
So, I guess, for infrastructure engineers, how this would be applicable to us, like what kind of solution could help improve systems?
Would you please repeat the question for me?
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question so you and everyone online can hear it. So the question was, for those of us on the infrastructure engineering side, how can we use these tools basically, in terms of contribution to the overall system resilience? Did I get that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so there are many aspects of it when you look at the infrastructure side. I know many of us are from transportation systems, whether it is pavements or bridges or structures of that sort, right? The key is how to manage. I'll pick on the bridge infrastructure for a moment. If you're looking at extreme event and you need to evacuate hundreds of thousands of people on the one hand, at the same hand, how do you bring in the emergency response facilities? So in designing your bridge structures, typically when we design bridge structures, maybe you have on a highway, on an interstate highway, you have two bridge decks with a median separating the two, but there may be reasons why we do that. However, if you had an integrated bridge deck, could you have one lane for contraflow? Makes it easier, and that ties in to operations. You cannot disconnect the design and construction of these infrastructure elements from the operations and use of that. So there has to be the end use perspective, okay? From the materials side, in terms of, I'm not a material specialist, so please pardon me if this comes across as being too simple or too naive. The types of materials that we might use. And in vehicles, for example, now, whether it is a transit vehicle and others, there are requirements of hardening the design so that if there is a fire, it will be able to withstand a certain amount. I do not know the extreme temperatures. We can't build every single roadway or every single bridge to withstand certain types of temperatures or stresses, but I don't have a better answer than that.
No, that's okay. Thanks very much for your input. Any other questions before we wrap up?
The other part, I just thought of one other, is building in redundancies. Okay, and we have increasingly the interdependencies between, let's say, sensors use communications, wireless or wired communication system. So even if you had one link in the communications off, can you still work with the sensor network or controls? It could be traffic control systems, for example.
Yeah, that's great. And I think actually the digital twin concept that we talked about earlier can help with that a lot too. So that's perfect. Great. Well, thank you for a great presentation, Professor Nambisan, and your contact info is also there in case anybody has further questions. And with that, I think let's thank all of our presenters one more time, and we'll wrap up this session.
Thank you.